When I was a kid, our family cat, Cheeto, always slept in the basement. It was just the rule. Every night, no exceptions. My parents didn't want him shedding all over the furniture, and they hated being woken up at odd hours by his scratching and yowling to go outside. So like clockwork, someone would scoop him up, carry him downstairs, and shut the door behind him. He never seemed to mind. The basement was spacious, cool, and quiet, filled with old furniture and storage boxes, where he could curl up and sleep undisturbed. It wasn't until I was 12 that I started questioning it. Cheeto was a calm cat, never the type to scratch at doors or make a fuss. But sometimes, after I shut him in the basement for the night, I'd hear noises, soft thumps, like something moving around down there. At first, I figured it was just him jumping onto the old couch or knocking over a stray box. But then there were the other sounds, slow, dragging noises, almost like footsteps. I told myself it was just the house settling, but a part of me wasn't so sure. One night, curiosity got the better of me. After my parents went to bed, I crept downstairs, standing just outside the basement door. I pressed my ear against the wood and listened. At first, nothing, then a faint shuffle. I swallowed hard and slowly turned the doorknob, easing the door open just a crack. The basement light was off, but the dim glow from the hallway spilled down the steps. Cheeto sat at the bottom, staring up at me. His ears were flattened, his tail twitching. He wasn't making a sound, but he wasn't alone. In the darkness behind him, I saw movement. Something shifted, just out of sight. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The air from the basement felt strangely cool, carrying a damp, musty scent that hadn't been there before. Cheeto remained still, his wide eyes locked onto mine, but his fur bristled along his back. I wanted to call out, to ask if someone was there, but my voice refused to work. Then the movement happened again, slow, deliberate, as if something was aware of my presence now. A faint creak echoed from deeper in the basement, like weight shifting on an old wooden floor. My fingers tightened around the doorknob, and every instinct screamed at me to shut the door and run. But before I could react, Cheeto suddenly bolted up the stairs, slipping through the gap in the door and brushing against my legs. At the same moment, a shadow stretched across the lower steps. Something tall, something I couldn't quite make out. My heart pounded as I slammed the door shut and locked it. I stood there, shaking, listening to the silence that followed. No footsteps. No more movement, just an awful, suffocating stillness pressing against the other side of the door. Cheeto rubbed against my ankle, his body still tense. I looked down at him, my skin prickling with unease. Whatever was in the basement, it wasn't just my imagination. I backed away from the basement door, my hands trembling. Cheeto stayed close, his tail twitching as he kept glancing at the door like he expected it to open. I forced a deep breath, trying to calm the rapid pounding in my chest. Maybe it was just a draft. Maybe I left a window open down there. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The shadow, the deliberate creak of the floor, those weren't tricks of my mind. I grabbed my phone from the counter, my fingers cold as I hovered over the keypad. Who was I even supposed to call? The police? And tell them what? That my cat saw a ghost in my basement? I forced myself to think rationally. If someone was in the basement, they had to have gotten in somehow. The only entrance was the door I had just locked or the small dust-covered window near the floor on the far side of the room. I hadn't heard breaking glass, and the window was barely big enough for a child to squeeze through. My stomach twisted as another possibility settled over me. What if whatever was down there hadn't come from outside? What if it had been there all along? I shook my head, pushing the thought away. There had to be an explanation. I just had to find it. Summoning what little courage I had left, I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. Cheeto let out a low, uncertain meow as I stepped toward the basement door again. My hand trembled as I gripped the knob, hesitating. The silence on the other side was almost worse than the noise from before. Taking a deep breath, I turned the handle slowly and pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. I aimed the flashlight down the wooden steps, the beam cutting through the thick darkness. Dust swirled in the air, but nothing moved. The basement looked just as it always had, concrete floors, old shelves lining the walls, and a single exposed bulb hanging from the ceiling. And yet, an unnatural chill seeped up from below, sending goosebumps down my arms. I took a cautious step onto the first stair, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. The beam of light wavered as I swept it across the room. Nothing seemed out of place, but the unease in my gut only deepened. Cheeto stayed at the top of the stairs, his eyes wide and unblinking, his tail puffed up like a bottle brush. He wasn't coming down, and that alone made me second-guess myself. Then, just as I was about to take another step, a soft rustling sound came from the far corner of the basement, near the old storage boxes. I froze, gripping the flashlight tighter. Someone, or something, was down there. My breath caught in my throat as I aimed the flashlight toward the sound. The beam landed on the stacked boxes, motionless and covered in dust. I swallowed hard, convincing myself it was just a rat or something equally harmless. But as I took another hesitant step down, I saw it. A shadow shifting just beyond the reach of the light. My grip on the flashlight tightened as an icy dread settled deep in my chest. The air in the basement felt heavier, suffocating, as if something unseen was watching me. I wanted to call out, to demand whoever was there to show themselves, but my voice refused to work. Then, the boxes moved. Not a small twitch, not a subtle shift, but a sudden, deliberate push, as if something inside was trying to break free. My body acted before my mind could catch up, and I stumbled back up the stairs, nearly dropping the flashlight. Cheeto let out a yowl and bolted from the doorway as I slammed the basement door shut, my heart pounding so violently I thought I might be sick. My hands trembled as I pressed my back against the door, breathing heavily. I had seen it, something real, something wrong, and now it was trapped in my basement. I stood frozen against the door, my pulse roaring in my ears. Cheeto circled my feet, his tail puffed up, eyes wide with alarm. I wanted to tell myself I had imagined it, that stress and exhaustion were playing tricks on me, but the way Cheeto hissed at the basement door made it impossible to ignore. Something was down there, something that moved the boxes. My fingers hovered over the doorknob, debating whether to lock it or leave it alone. Then, just as I was about to take a step back, I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks from the other side. My breath hitched in my throat. The knocks were soft but intentional, like someone, or something, wanted me to know it was there. Cheeto let out a low growl, his body tense, ears flattened against his head. I took a shaky step back, my hand gripping my phone as I debated calling someone, anyone. But what would I even say? That there was knocking coming from my basement when I lived alone? That my cat seemed to sense something I couldn't see? My thoughts spiraled, but then another sound cut through the silence. A slow, creaking noise, like the basement door shifting against the frame. I bolted. Cheeto yowled as I scooped him up and ran for my bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart pounded as I pressed my back against it, straining to hear any more sounds from downstairs. The apartment was deathly silent, but I knew better than to believe I was alone. Cheeto squirmed in my arms, his fur bristling, his gaze locked on the crack beneath the door. I followed his stare, and my stomach lurched. There, in the dim light from the hallway, was the unmistakable shadow of 2 feet standing just outside my bedroom. The shadow didn't move. It just stood there, silent and unmoving, as if waiting for me to do something. My fingers tightened around my phone, but my hands were slick with sweat, making it hard to hold. Cheeto hissed, his body rigid in my arms. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but my throat felt like it was closing up. Then slowly the shadow shifted, 1 foot stepping forward, then the other. A soft creak echoed through the silence as the doorknob began to turn.